5 months ago, I made this video marking the very first time I had the chance to work with one of my subscribers, and I had so much fun working on that collaboration. I knew basically right away that I really wanted to work with more of you, so at the end of that video, I announced my very first musical event that I've ever hosted and called it the Community Collab Tape. The idea was really simple. I basically invited anyone that might be interested in working with me to send me a sample, and then I would work with everyone to put together what I expected to be a really small beat tape. Long story short, I was blown away by the number of submissions I received, and over the next 2 weeks, I ended up spending around 200 hours taking 17 samples from 17 producers in this community and putting together an album that I'm unbelievably proud of and really excited to say is finally coming out starting this month. So to kick off the rollout of the first set of singles, I'm very excited to welcome one of the producers that was featured on the album to break down the sample that he sent to me before I give you guys the walkthrough of exactly what I did to turn it into a full track. So to show you exactly how he made a sample, I'm excited to be passing things off to my friend Dreamboat Beats.
Hi, hello, how's it going, fellow Lukians? Fellow Dalians, fellow Mote-tites. All right. I'm Eddie, also known as Dreamboat Beats, and I had the pleasure of working on a song with Luke a couple months ago. I made a sample. I sent that sample to him, and then he did all the hard work of building a song around it. And I'm going to take you inside that sample right now. I'm going to show you what I did, show you what I sent over to Luke, and then you'll hear the finished product. So let's just dive right in. First, we got some strings sounding like this. Not doing too much, just doing string things, padding around back there. That's the BBC Symphony Orchestra VST from Spitfire Audio, which if you don't have, you should get. It's free, it sounds very good, and there's no effects on it. It's just a little bit of EQ, pretty aggressive low cut there, because all I need is that high. I don't need any low information. So that's the strings. Moving on from the strings, we've got some bass down on the low end. Sounds like this. Kind of squishy. That is the Key Bass from Martinic is the company. This is free. It sounds really cool. I'm pretty sure I heard about it from Luke. I think from a Luke Daily video. So Luke, thank you. It's got this cool lever you can move around. And you can do weird stuff with it. It's got really cool bunch of presets that are great, but I haven't been brave enough to try this. You can like detune individual notes. Perhaps one day when I'm feeling bold, I will detune B flat, but leave everything else the same, and we'll just see what happens. And the only thing going on the bass is some EQ with honestly a little bit of a weird EQ for bass. I'm not sure why I did this. This was several months ago, and I'm sure I had a reason at the time. And then on to the more interesting instruments. Got some piano going on, and this is the Waves Grand Rhapsody piano. I have like a Waves subscription, so I use a lot of Waves stuff. And this is a very cool sounding piano. It sounds really good. Lots of really high quality samples, but it uses tons of processing time and computer resources. So I usually bounce the MIDI down to an audio file. I didn't on this one because it's so small, but anyway, I've got some EQ, nothing crazy. I also have a tiny bit of compression at around 3:1 ratio. That's not doing too much. I have, this is another Waves plugin. It's called Vocal Rider. And it kind of does a similar job as a compressor in that it evens out the volume, but it doesn't do it by squooshing the waveform. It does it by riding this fader. So it's almost like you went in and automated everything, but it kind of is doing it for you in real time. It's like you've got an awesome engineer just like frantically writing a fader for you. And then last but not least, in fact, it's first in the chain, I have this, it's called Cassette. It's exactly what it looks like. It's like you're listening on an old Walkman, listening on a cassette. It adds so much flavor and sauce to anything you put it on. It's amazing on drums. It sounds great on piano. It sounds great on basically everything. And you can lo-fi it up with your wow and flutter and really, really dirty up the sound. And this is just on a default right now, but you can go kooky with it. So here's what that sounds like, the piano. Last but not least, we've got some horns. We got some trombones. Yep. And that's not a VST, that's me playing it. I play the trombone. And there are no effects, nothing on the individual tracks. Everything is bussed to this Bones master here. This is this Bones bus, I guess. This is a track stack if you're using Logic. We've got EQ, not much, just a low cut. I find that I use this SM7B microphone to record horns, and they just sound good. The mic does about, I don't know, 90-95% of the work for you. So the EQ is really minimal. Again, just a low cut. Take care of your low end, it'll take care of you. Hey-oh. And then a little bit of compression, 2.2 ratio, just the Logic stock compressor, by the way. I'll tell you a secret, it's mostly what I use is the Logic stock compressor. And here's cassette again, and that also actually kind of functions as a parallel compressor. Again, this is just the default. A lot of the times I am more aggressive with this plugin, not on this particular track. Although I do have the erasures turned up. This is as if the tape had been erased and recorded over. I've got it up on 20x. Yeah! And I'll turn it on and off so you can hear how not good it sounds, how much work this plugin is doing. Check it out. Off. That ain't it. Turn it on again. And it's great all of a sudden. It's a magical plugin. I really love it. It's by Waves Factory, not Waves. It's about $50. Completely worth it. Worth every penny. I use it so much. It sounds amazing on drums. It's just a great plugin. I have some sends going. Nothing crazy, just reverb and delay. The reverb is Sound Toys little plate. It doesn't get much simpler than this. We just got one big knob and two small knobs. It's a reverb. What do you want? It's great. And then there's an EQ on the reverb just to kill any kind of weird low echoes, reflections, and any kind of weird super high reflections. Over in delay world, we've got another Waves. This is the J37 tape machine. Again, really cool. It's great. I'm using it as a tape delay here on this delay channel, but you can also use it to add saturation, use it as a tape simulator just to add some fuzziness, some wow and flutter. There's different tape formulations you can use, different tape speeds. And what else do we have? We got a mix bus, 2.5 ratio, compression, very basic compression, cassette one more time to add some more flavor, EQ with just a little low cut. And again, this isn't like a fully fleshed out song. This is just a sample that I created to send over to Luke, and I stemmed it out so it doesn't even have all these effects on it necessarily, but this is what I did. And this is the final product. Here's what it all sounds like together. That's it. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. And back to you, Luke. Wah!
Huge shout out to Eddie for coming on the channel, and an even bigger shout out for this unbelievable sample that he sent. As soon as I heard it, I knew it was going to be a little bit different from my usual style. If you're at all familiar, I make a lot of very sleepy, almost ambient lo-fi. So these horns and this kind of rich string and heavy bass was definitely a little bit outside my quote unquote comfort zone. But I was really excited to dive in and start experimenting with how I could kind of bring this a little bit closer to what I usually make while still doing it justice. The first thing I did was just kind of a little bit of sort of executive producing decisions, largely through the lens of the fact that I was the only person of the 18 producers on the album that had heard all of the tracks. So I was basically in charge of trying to make this thing sound as cohesive as possible. So I made these kind of executive decisions to basically switch out a few sounds just to kind of bring the songs a little bit closer to one another. So the first thing I changed was the string sample that he laid down. I had him send me over the MIDI and ended up just throwing on the Labs Freeze Strings Long. There's a little bit less motion and kind of a little bit less phasing going on in this than in the BBC orchestra strings. And then to complement that, I ended up coming up with an additional lower string layer, which I believe are also on the Labs long strings here. Just kind of bolster that part, give it a little bit more intrigue kind of as the song progresses. I brought that in a little bit later. And then the one other kind of major change I made, I did see that you shouted out key bass, Eddie, so love that you're picking up tips from the videos. I did stick with key bass for the sound, but I actually went back to the stock preset. I just felt like that kind of warbly bass sound was introducing a lot of like mid-high info that I thought would start stepping on some of the layers that I knew I was going to be adding down the road. So from the stock preset, I just threw it on sustain mode with the longest decay that I could so that it would hit strong and fade away a little bit more like a bass guitar pluck. And I had it track velocity, so it wasn't all just one constant volume. Other than that, once again, I took the MIDI that Eddie sent me and just dropped it right into this preset. So now that the kind of boring, just sound swapping things are out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some of the stylistic adjustments I made to the original sample to start getting it to sound a little bit more like a full track. For the piano sample, I ended up playing with some stereo automation, where in the intro I wanted everything to be pretty closed and feel like this kind of like worn out record. And then I wanted that to kind of blow out back to, you know, the full stereo separation. I've got a limiter on a pretty strong threshold, but not a super 2.6 to 1 ratio. Just kind of squishing down a couple notes that I felt like were really poking out. Parametric EQ, taking out any of those like kind of unnecessary low frequencies, just some rumbles, and leave plenty of room for that key bass to do its work. TDR Nova, this is just a dynamic EQ, taking down something around like 550 hertz it looks like. Just for a note that I felt like was really poking through the mix and kind of dominating the ears a little bit more than I was hoping for. Limiter, a little bit unusual for a more lead element, or at least more melodic element like this piano, but I did actually sidechain this to the kick just to make sure the kick was really thumping through as we went on. And then finally, one more dynamic EQ here, just cutting out that same frequency. It was apparently really poking out and bothering me enough to want to squash it. So now moving to these trombones, which I felt like really were the thing that gave this sample its identity. I once again didn't want to do anything too transformative to them. I wanted to really be true to the sound that Eddie had sent. So I just did a little bit of EQing, again, taking out any unwanted low stuff, a little bit of a band pass here, cutting out a peak that apparently was bothering me. So after all those simple EQs, I just routed everything to this trombone bus where I've got an RC20 doing a little bit more to kind of transform the sound of these trombones. It's not doing anything crazy, just some pretty subtle stuff. And I think most notably is we've got the stereo effect turned on the reverb and the magnetic. So it's going to create a little bit of a wider feel and kind of almost sound like there's extra voices going on. So I just kind of wanted to put a little more size into those trombone lines and let them really be the stars of this loop. So all of those changes, this is what I did to the main melodic components of that loop here. So of course, from there, we needed a drum groove, and I decided to just kind of lay everything out individually. I don't even think I had my beat pad at this point, so all this was just kind of clicked in. I'm not going to go through the individual sounds, but maybe we can just listen to the drum groove soloed so you can get a feel for it by itself, and then I'll play it all together. So obviously soloed, it sounds like there's a boatload of reverb on the snare because there is. We've got a good punchy click with a slight bit of kick to help it cut through the mix. These kind of nice shuffly shakers, both Foley loop and the shakers I actually laid down in the MIDI with a good bit of velocity variation going on there. And then an additional accent shaker layer, and then this nice occasional closing hi-hat that comes in every once in a while, kind of right before the downbeat. Maybe by themselves they don't sound that amazing, but I think in the context of the track, you'll be as satisfied as I am. So let's go coming out of the intro. This is what we've got. Oh, and then there's just one little fill that I think you're gonna notice pretty handedly. So now working backwards from that drop that you just heard, let's talk about kind of the intro and how I laid it out to build up to that point. So I basically just took the sample and broke it out so that certain stems came in by themselves, just to kind of give it a feeling of growth. And then like I mentioned kind of at the beginning is that I played with some automations to make everything feel pretty closed off, so that this vinyl effect was really coming through and it would feel like this worn out vinyl before we hit the full drop. The piano basically by itself with some rain that then ends up dropping out in the first drop to create some variance there. A pretty strong vinyl effect going on throughout the whole track, just give it that solid lo-fi feel. And then we've got that fruity stereo enhancer completely closed off on the piano, so any stereo information is completely sent up the mids for the piano. Similarly, as the strings come in, I decided to just automate that up from basically nothing so that they come in very subtly, and then right before the drop hits, I wanted everything to cut out, so I either cut the audio itself or did a volume automation if there was going to be some reverb overhanging. And then the one other little automation layer I had on the intro here was on the trombones actually. I've got this parametric EQ that's starting off with high pass, so it's pretty high. I mean 472 with a gentle roll off, albeit basically just kind of thinning it out, leaving like all of the characters still in there, plenty of the emotion that's still in the playing that the sample had. But then as we get through the intro, that starts coming down and we start introducing a lot more of the body as things start widening out here. So all that kind of paired up with just a couple of nice subtle effects. We've got a couple white noise transitions, that fill, and then a laser. Yeah, then another white noise transition and a nice little crash to really accent that downbeat. So all that comes together for this to be the intro into the first drop. So once we get that through that first full drop, full accompaniment, the drums are going through, everything's rolling. You've now heard the trombone parts 2 times. I figured in my arranging brain it makes sense to give the ear a break from the trombone. And at the time, all I had was the piano, the string, the trombone, and the bass stems, right? So naturally, I just kind of repeated those things and cut a few things out. And then I sent that version of the arrangement back to Dreamboat Beats. He actually pitched to me that maybe for the bridge, we did an 8-bar section over some new chords. So this was a super cool thing for me because it's actually the first lo-fi track I've ever worked on that has a key change. So let's take a peek at exactly what Dreamboat Beats did to make that happen. So coming out of that first drop, we've got this really nice bass run that I think kind of already naturally sets up nicely for a key change. It's got this, fast arpeggiated downward motion, and then pretty wisely, Eddie followed this movement from an E flat down to a D major scale. So I basically just threw a couple of transition sounds, dropped Eddie's brand new keys in, and then I just cut the strings out altogether to give the ears a break from that kind of high-end info. Along with that, I simplified the drums a good bit, automated EQ in that basically is just filtering the snare so it feels a little bit more muted. And that was where I laid down my very first guitar of the track. So let's give a listen to that transition into the bridge, and then I can talk you through a little bit more of the details. really thought I was gonna. Is that as unsatisfying as that whole, like, when you're playing the descending scale and then you hit the wrong note at the very end? Has anyone else had that in their TikTok algorithm? Anywho, really, really, really beautiful stuff out of the keys from Dreamboat Beats. I really, really liked what he ended up doing with the sample. I thought that this took it from like a pretty solid lo-fi track that, you know, I didn't think was like super repetitive, And then I feel like once we dropped this in, it really brought it to the next level. I felt like this felt like a completely different track, really, you know, pretty professional, if you ask me. It's pretty legit all of a sudden. And then I started recording guitar over this key change part. So I found some nice transition notes and a tone that I liked. I came up with a melody and I laid that down. I was feeling super happy about it. But what I failed to think about was that we're moving back into the original key at the end section here. And for some reason it was not clicking in my brain. I remember this well, trying to work on this, and I just could not find notes I liked. So I ended up just kind of playing through it and being unhappy with what I played. And then I just popped back in and retuned like literally 2 notes, because it was just 2 notes that were out of the scale as it turned out. But that's why you'll see here I've got 2 stems from what the guitar was up to, where coming into the original key, I had to retune my first notes so that they actually fit. But other than that, it was really just transition sounds, drums come back in full force, EQ goes away, we've got the strings coming back in. I forgot to mention that the rain did come back in during the bridge, once again creating contrast both with our Foley and ambiances, our drums change, the instrumentation changes, the mix of the instrumentation, and the chords change. So this is a very spicy transition, a very spicy B section with lots of changing going on, but I feel like it actually flows super nicely. So again, shout out to Eddie for that. I think there's no way I could have done that without him. I guess real quick, I'll take you through the effects chain on my guitar. It is a little bit unusual for what I've shown on the channel in the past. So I opened it up with a transient shaper. That's how you're gonna feel this kind of like sweep in sound to a lot of the attack of those notes. I actually liked what it was doing. It's not necessarily like, you know, the most technically correct way to use it, but I felt like it kind of transformed the sound and made it a little bit more interesting than just a simple pluck of the pick. We ran into the archetype Pliny on the Paper Moon preset. Did not change this one bit, just a nice kind of distortion, warm guitar tone there. Some EQ, I was trying to brighten it up because we had a lot of low information, especially from that key bass in there. Fruity limiter, looks like it's doing some compression. You know how it is. TDR Nova, scooping out some more of that muddiness that I tried to cut out with the parametric EQ. And then once again, a nice high pass on one more EQ, just to always make room for the bass. Dreamboat Beat said it well, treat your low end right, it'll treat you right. God, that's awesome. I love that so much. And yeah, I mean, other than that, we really just kind of played around with a couple of extra automation layers as we went. Brought the bass volume and the guitar volume down towards the very end. The drums dropped out for the last repeat of the horns, just to let them kind of beat it by themselves. The string volume faded away. All that comes together for this final transition from the bridge to the second drop. Before I let this play us out, I want to give Dreamboat Beats one more big thank you for coming on the channel. Huge shout out to all of the producers that sent in a sample for this community collab tape. I am super excited for it to finally be coming out. I know it's been a super long time coming. Big shout out to Soothing Sound Waves for supporting this project. And keep an eye out, because every week for the next 4 weeks, we're dropping 4 songs from the album, with 1 song closing out the month of September for the 17th track. So if you want to hear more of the tracks, just like this one that I made with a bunch of people from this community, be sure to hit the subscribe button, join the Discord server, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Spotify, follow all the producers on Spotify. Just give everything a listen, show some support, show some love for the gang. And yeah, I think that's all I got. So I'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Yeah.